I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs get bored with doing burrs all the time. And I wanted more. And so that was the next avenue, is I wanted to start helping other people do it, because I realized, like, if I can do this, then anyone can do it. And we actually started a real estate meetup in Oklahoma City, but I realized right away that anyone can do it, but there has to be a mindset shift and there has to be some intentionality. And so complacency is the enemy of intentionality.
Welcome, entrepreneurs, to Pay or Quit,
where we reveal the gritty truth behind business success.
People see the glory, but not the struggle it takes to get there.
We're here to share the real stories of entrepreneurs navigating the tough intersection of business and relationships. I'm Tony Klein.
And I'm Shawn Johnson. And together we'll guide you through the real challenges faced as serial entrepreneurs.
Join us for the untold stories behind the scenes.
Buckle in, it might get messy.
Hey, Marty, let's just get started and share a little bit of your background. I know you run a business, but you also do some real estate investing. And so if you want to just kind of touch on a little bit of both of those things, which came first and what transitioned from one to the other, or what caused you to transition from one to the other, and if it was a complete transition or if just sort of stacked on top of each other over time. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
So I grew up in Iowa on a farm, and I just mentioned that because I come from an ag background, but also really hardcore work ethic. And with that, my dad was a sheep shearer. And when I was 15, he said, "Hey, Marty, you're going to learn." And I said, "No, Dad." It was the first time, I bucked up to my dad. And I said, "No." And he said, "No, you are." He said, "Until you do 1,000 head, I want you to give it a try." So I was like, fine. Well, as you guys know, compound effect of anything leads to easier and easier success. So that was one of the best things he could have done for me. That was almost 30 years ago. And not only did it teach me work ethic, but it taught me how to relate to people, taught me lots of little business things. And, I learned that at an early age. It's honestly what put me through college, was shearing sheep. And then, and I really had the entrepreneur bug my whole life. I've worked at a couple W-2 jobs, but for the most part, have just loved the free-spiritedness and freedom of entrepreneurship. Not always easy and not always the wide road, I guess, but I've always leaned that way. And the shearing sheep is a big part of my life because my dad always called it was fast cash, because you would show up at someone's farm, you'd shear 20 head and they would pay you. So you're always getting paid the day of. And so my whole life I've been able to fall back to that. Shearing sheep, though, sort of led to me learning how to shear alpacas. It's a lot more of a niche, and it actually is a lot less hard on your body and pays better. So it's like, why not? So I kind of built that business up. In the meantime of building that up, I bought my first duplex, first rental. And partly because I was actually working a W-2 job at the time, but I knew I was destined for entrepreneurship, and I wasn't going to have that big 401k nest egg set aside for me someday. So I said, why not buy a rent house, have tenants, they'll make your payments, and compound effect of that. So bought a duplex, and I started shearing alpacas. And for about 10 years then I sheared alpacas. And the beautiful thing about that is I could work for 3 months of the year. I could make all the income. I could work with my kids. And then I would have 9 months off where I could work on these rent houses and property manage and just be available to my family and really have the time freedom that we want as entrepreneurs. So that's what the alpaca shearing, and it was sheep shearing. You always have to tell people sheep shearing because they understand the picture better. But basically, yeah, we traveled around the United States giving haircuts to animals.
And how do you make money with that? What's the business product there?
So yeah, we just give them haircuts. So it's like $35 a head, and if you can do them in 5-6 minutes, then it's maybe hard to make a business. It's as far as other people, but it was really easy for me to generate 120,000 a year in that period of time, to be able to live the rest of the year without having to work, really.
And is the wool
So
used then for clothing or anything like that? Is that what's the point of shearing the alpaca?
the point is just really to get them a haircut because they get too hot, and they'll overheat. They won't want to eat. They'll stay in the shade, and they already have a higher body temperature, and so they'll just overheat in the summer if they don't get the haircut. There are people that do stuff with the fiber, the hair, and they'll process into stuff, but that market kind of went away probably 15 years ago because there became so many alpacas and the margins came down and it's very labor intensive. So the alpaca industry is not like the wool industry in the sense that they've industrialized it to the sense that they have a similar product on every animal. It's way more niche, which makes it, from a business standpoint, it makes it harder to capitalize on individual animals and products.
As an entrepreneur starting a new business, and I know it sounds like you were kind of following in your dad's footsteps a little bit, but you mentioned traveling across the country, driving, creating this book of accounts or this clientele, and if you can share a little bit about how you went about doing that, because I think entrepreneurs sometimes struggle with, I have this great skill, I have this craft that I've developed, but how do I tell the world about it? How do I actually get business from this thing that I've become good at? And so I don't know if you have some anything to share, positive or
Sure.
negative, around that, but I'm sure our listeners would be interested to hear how you become successful developing a business around driving around, giving animals haircuts.
Yeah, good question, Tony. So I tend to be the guy that just jumps in head first and then thinks about consequences later, and sort of figures it out. So uh, what I did is I knew how to shear sheep, which means I knew how to run a clippers. There's alpacas is a little more. There's a lot more to it, but I knew I wanted to do it, and so I guess there was desire. And honestly, what I did, I got on the website, the internet, and I Googled alpaca farms in my area, and I sent them all a letter, and it said something to the effect of, "Dear so and so, I'm starting an alpaca shearing business, and I would love to be your shearer. Love, Marty." I mean, there was a lot more. There was a lot more sales pitch to it. But I that first year I got work just by asking. And so that would be, I guess, one piece of advice I would give to entrepreneurs. Just put yourself out there and ask. You're not any worse off if they say no, but you may get some work. So, and from there, I mean, it was just a matter of, Dad always told me, if you treat people fair and charge a fair price, you'll have all the work you can have, all the work you want. And so that's really what we set our business model. We were standard price, and we treated people fair and kind, and showed up when we said we'd show up, and did the work we were supposed to. And it was a small niche industry, and so word of mouth, we sort of doubled every year without a lot of effort.
So I want to go back to that first letter that you sent out. I know this is a long time ago now, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they'll do that. They'll send out a letter. They'll take whatever budget they have and they say, okay, I'm going to create this direct mail piece. I'm going to come up with a fancy, slick postcard that's got looks like laminated balsa wood. I mean, it's nice and thick and perfect pictures or whatever. They have somebody type out that perfect letter and they send it out, and they blow their budget for marketing on that one letter, and then nothing, because it's the first time anybody's heard of you, right? They don't have that background. So I mean, when you go back to that, did you experience some of that? It was like we sent it out, or was it just because it was such a niche market that people just reached out, and then you had some word of mouth from there?
Obviously, and it was just an email, so it wasn't pretty, it wasn't decorative. I didn't. This was like 2008. I don't know how advanced email was at the time, but it was pretty black and white. I didn't do anything out of the ordinary, but my pitch in there was that I had sheared sheep for probably 15 years at the time, and that I had, I think in 2000, I had won the National Junior Sheep Shearing Contest, And so that was something I put in there. Like I was trying to say, like, I understand quality. I haven't sheared many alpacas, but I've sheared a lot of sheep. And so that was what I was leaning on, was my experience. That was my pitch. But I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. And I look back now and I'm just blown away that people even trusted me because I had no idea. In the letter, Tony, I wrote, I said, I'm going to a shearing school this spring and I'm going to learn. And after that, I want to do your shearing. And the shearing school I was living in Montana at the time, and it was going back to Illinois, and my dad was going to teach me. It wasn't an official school at all. It was, I mean, I just dove in.
Yeah. Well, I think for people who are just getting started in a business, I think there's some really good lessons in that. I'm glad we dug a little deeper in that, because it's not just sending out the marketing message, but it's actually figuring out what to put in that message. And you leaned on some relative adjacent expertise that you were able to pull into your letter that you sent out. Plus you talked about the future of, I'm going to get accreditation or a certification, or I'm going through this school. So I think those are some really good takeaways for our audience. So, okay, so let's take a little bit of a transition from, we've been shearing sheep, we get into the alpacas, we buy a duplex, and how did that go? Like, did that change your world at that point? Is it like, I'm done with sheep, I'm done with alpacas? Or was it just sort of, this is kind of a cool thing, but it's sitting percolating on the back burner here?
I actually still shear sheep and alpacas. I've downsized the last few years quite a bit, but it kind of gets in your blood, kind of like running, you know. You just kind of get so you enjoy it, and you, yeah, there'll come a day where I don't do it anymore. But my dad, he's like, I have two other brothers that shear professionally, and my dad is in his late 60s, and he worked with my brother this year, and he just loved it. He didn't even care about getting paid. He was just like, I just want to have a sheep between my legs and do the work. So to some extent, yes, it's very addicting. I'll probably always do it, but I did buy that duplex, and mindset wise, I was raised very Dave Ramsey, very get out of debt, stay out of debt mentality. And so I did that whole duplex with cash and fix it up little by little. And it took me a couple of years. So it wasn't this romantic, we got instant cash flow. I mean, and then I was learning property management, and well, I didn't know about property management, so I got schooled. But I learned a lot, and it just, snowballed from there. With as I bought back more time with the shearing business, I got more into real estate, realizing the opportunities with leverage, and started learning about good debt, and then we started buying more and more rentals accordingly.
So tell us a little bit more about, you said you got schooled by property management. Tell us a little bit. There's got to be a really good story behind that, and maybe some tenant experience there.
Yeah, well, the first thing I did is I hired my sister-in-law to property manage, because I didn't know how to. And if I didn't know how to, and she didn't know how to, then it would, she would be better at than me. So that was the first lesson, is no systems and processes. There was everything. I mean, we accepted cash. We weren't firm with people. We didn't communicate expectations up front. We had just a generic lease agreement. We let people get 2 months behind. And I mean, this was just a duplex with just a couple tenants, but that was the next thing I did. I had a really good pain point in that duplex for a couple of years with tenants and turnover and trash. I mean, we could do all the T's, I guess. But I learned, like, if I'm going to do this, I have to learn to manage. And that means I need to like that. That's the biggest thing I can do, because all that we wanted to do was take the tenant's money, take a little bit, and give the rest to the bank, and which is just a management. And so the next thing I really delve into was property management. And we don't property manage for anybody but ourselves. But because my first couple of years were painful, yeah, there was lots of lessons learned there.
Most people would have given up, right? Most people would have said, you know what, this whole landlording thing is not for me. I'm going to sell this asset and I'm going to move on or move my money somewhere else. What made you stay?
I think just the understanding the power of um, leverage with using the bank's money and a tenant's money and what that would compound into. And knowing that I didn't have like a 401k to fall back to, like I was going to be an entrepreneur. And so if I wanted to retire at some point, I needed to figure out how to have a savings account I couldn't tap into easily. So it was probably more just a desire of necessity to keep going. But I mean, I enjoyed the rehab process. And as you guys know, everything is learnable. You can learn about anything you want. And so I really just had that sort of attitude toward property management as well. Like we just got to learn this and put systems in place. It can't get much worse.
Yeah. I love that because, I'm just reminded that entrepreneurs succeed because they have grit to get through the hard times. And you saw the opportunity and you didn't give up on the opportunity. Real estate, this is where I love to relate is, I love real estate investing, is a game of long-term investing. It's
Mhm.
reinvesting and reinvesting, and that turns into this really big nest egg over time. It doesn't happen overnight. Well, sometimes you could get home runs, but rarely do you get home runs. It's usually a bunch of singles, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
just a bunt to get you to first base, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just base hits.
Yeah. So you had this duplex. Where did your next investment, real estate investment go?
So it was interesting because I had really such a limited mindset and with finances at the time. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, and that made me just think like maybe I could get a line of credit with my because I was free and clear on the duplex, and um, and so that's what I did. I went to the bank. I mean, I was so scared, but I went to the bank and I asked them, "Hey, could I get a line of credit on this so I can go buy another one?" And um, and I really just did the burr, and I did one. And when you're doing the entrepreneur thing, you do it really slow, and then you realize, okay, that worked, and then you do a little faster, and then you realize, oh, okay, well, it gets easier and easier. So yeah, when I bought the second house, we did use contractors, and we were using a line of credit, and so we were trying to do things faster and turning it quicker. I just really delve into at that point because, and a lot of it, Shawn, I had 9 months of every year to do real estate, and it was something I could kind of include my family in with, and so it was easy to um, bring them in and have them, help me paint or whatever. But I had this extra time, and I really started believing in the asset, in the investment of that as an asset, um, and I think that yeah, it started to click. It started to get easier, and we did line credit. We'd rinse and repeat. We would do the whole burr thing, and property management. I read a couple good books on that. I started using proper forms and learned the right things to say, and that got easier. And one of the best pieces of advice I got on that from a guy named Mike Butler. He has a book called Landlord and Autopilot, but he said to think of your tenants as employees, and as you meet them, you know, where they're going to be able to follow rules and do what they're told and hold up their end. And that really helped me um, within the rental part of it, property management part of it, to think of them as employees. Are they holding up their end of it? Are they not? Well, then we need to fire them. Do we get along? Do we not? I mean, all those things like, and I know that we're limited on some laws in there, but yeah, that really helped me make that easier and make that shift rather than just take the first guy that comes along. He's got the deposit. He wants to move in tomorrow, you know.
I love it. You made a good point at the beginning of that you said you were you're a big Dave Ramsey fan. You were raised that way, but then you shifted and read Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. If you would have just stuck to Dave Ramsey's method, you would have never been able to leverage, because he would say never take out debt. Never take out debt to then go leverage into another investment. And Robert Kiyosaki is the opposite, right? I mean, he's like, yes, you should leverage so you can scale and build more.
Mhm.
What made you focus on something outside of kind of what you've grown up in?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it was such an identity. Um, that whole debt, because I didn't have college debt. I always worked through college. Um, our house we had sort of flipped a few houses early in our marriage so that we were debt free even on that. So it was really a struggle, to be honest. And it was a struggle that was an identity because we were taught so strongly and we live so strongly to be debt free and the financial freedom of that. Um, but Robert Kiyosaki just really opened up my eyes that there is OPM, other people's money, and there is huge opportunities with leverage. And I started doing the math like, okay, if I save $10,000 a year to buy a $100,000 house, it'll take me 10 years. Inflation will probably move it to 120. So every 12 years, I could buy a house free and clear. Like, how many can I get before I'm turned 60, 65? And it was too slow. But I realized I could take $10,000 and put it down on a house, and I could do that 3-4 times a year and rinse and repeat. And then you could just leverage that and then take the tenant's money and pay the debt. And as long as you're buying right, then it was like a no-brainer to me. Um, there was some, I mean, I know you guys like to talk about struggles. So there was definitely some marriage struggles in there, as my wife is not quite as convinced as I am that this is the way to financial freedom, because our idea of financial freedom prior was debt free. But that was there was lots of lessons there as well.
Talk to us through that a little bit. How do you get on the same page? Look, both of us have been married. Tony's been married 20 plus years. I've been married almost 18. And I could not do what I do without my wife. Like literally, she's the better half, right? And I think Tony feels the same way. We just have this supportive structure behind us. How do you get a spouse on the same page? Because, big financial decisions like buying rental properties are ones you want the backup, the support on, right? So how do you get on the same page there?
Yeah, I think great question. And I think it's just a matter of talking through it. And my wife is very logical. And so we would look at a house and we would run the numbers together and we would say, we can buy this house for, uh, I'm in Oklahoma City market. And at the time you could buy a house. We'll just kind of use basic numbers, but you could buy a house for say $70,000 and we could put 30,000 in rehab and it would value at 150, but it would also rent at say $1,000. But I'm just kind of helping your listeners with the numbers. My mortgage would be about 700, and my insurance and um, property tax would be 150. So I knew, and it was just a matter of discussing it with her, and we'd put it on paper. Listen, we can buy this, we can refi it, we can set this up so it's paid off in 20 years. In the meantime, day one, we make $150 a month. And so it was lots of those discussions, and there was lots of houses I feel like we missed out on, honestly, because we weren't on the same page. But we always wanted to be on the same page on things. So it was just a matter of hashing it out and discussing it. And you make a really good point. Like, yeah, I don't want to do it without her. There's a reason I said I do, and um, secrets aren't fun. And in Oklahoma, she's got to sign everything anyway, so you can't really get around it.
Yeah. Well, Marty, I'd love to switch gears just a little bit and talk about you've been doing this for a while. You've built up quite a portfolio. and it went from that duplex to adding 2, 3, 4 a year to now that you've developed what I would suppose is some pretty thick skin in going through some of the negotiations, going through some of the ups and downs, really getting good at analyzing opportunities. And I know that you've now taken that information and you've got your own podcast, and I believe that podcast is called Kill Complacency, right?
Mhm.
And that's the same that's on your hat. So, what's your purpose for having that podcast? What do you share on that podcast?
Yeah, so what kind of happened is, yeah, we got really good at real estate. And I don't know if this is fair to say, but I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs get bored with, at least I did. I got bored with doing burrs all the time. And I wanted more, and so I wanted to teach other people. And the other thing is my kids became adults, young adults. I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. And even as they were like 15, 16, I was teaching them real estate. And so that was the next avenue, is I wanted to start helping other people do it, because I realized, like, if I can do this, then anyone can do it. And we actually started a real estate meetup in Oklahoma City. And but I realized right away that, like, yes, anyone can do it, but there has to be a mindset shift, and there has to be some intentionality. And so complacency is the enemy of intentionality. And so my daughter and I started talking. She's an entrepreneur as well, and so we said, hey, let's not only try to gather investors involved, but let's actually share people's stories about killing complacency or living intentionally. And so that's the purpose of that podcast. It's probably about 6 months old. And we just try to share people's stories about intentional steps they take to execute better on goals and things that they have in their life.
Okay, so speaking of goals, I know that, and this is where I get to light up and talk a little bit about running, and which I honestly I don't actually love running that much, but I love what running does for
Mhm.
me and to me, and who I become. And so it says you've done 6 marathons, and you're signed up to do 100K. So tell me a little bit about that. What led you up to running the marathons? What made you decide to take the jump from the marathon distance to 100K, which 100K is quite a bit farther than the 26 miles of a marathon, and then what has that done for you? How is that, the decision to do that, the commitment, how has that affected the rest of just who you are? And you talked about there has to be a mindset shift, and how
Mhm.
has that helped you with your mindset shift?
Uh, 2.5 years ago, Tony, I would have said, I hate running. I'm not a runner. Like, I would try it every now and again, and I would just, it wasn't for me. I would try, and it was hard. My lungs hurt, my legs hurt, and that was my identity. But 2.5 years ago, it was 2 years ago in June, I was, 40 years old, getting older, getting fatter. My body hurt. I would wake up, my whole body would hurt every morning, and I would say to my wife, oh, I'm just getting so old. But I was talking to my brother about it, and he said, well, you should get into running because it'd be good accountability. And I was like, all right, I'll do a half marathon. And he's like, well, like, anyone can do a half. You should do a full. and so be it. So I signed up for one, and did it. And I guess that'd be another lesson, maybe set big goals, because the journey along the way you'll learn so many things about yourself. Had I signed up for a 5K, I would have ran once a week, and it would have not have been the same training. But that marathon gave me the accountability to run 5-6 days a week, and that compounded into results, and realizing that my lungs don't have to hurt, my legs don't have to hurt. I can get in shape, and this can get easier. And so, yeah, it just compounded. And in regards to kind of what I learned about myself, yeah, I love it. I told my daughter this week, I said, I love running because it reminds me every day that I can do anything I want if I stick to it. And it just reminds you that you can do the impossible, because that's what it was for me. And I'm sure that's what, kind of for you as well, right? You do these really long races, and it's a mindset shift that you find the end of yourself and you keep going, and you find out that you leveled up and the hard got easier.
Yeah. One of the things I learned from doing these long races is that we all dream way too small.
Mm,
And by just applying yourself, finding a dream and saying, I'm going after that, is just so powerful for just helping you overcome the small challenges. And in addition to that, I talk a lot about if you want to learn to run 50 miles, you start hanging around people that run 100
yep.
miles because it's only half as far, and frankly it's the easy half. It's the first half, right? If you were going to run 50 versus them running 100, but by committing to doing that, and I'm talking about running, but really this is in all aspects
No,
of
it's
life.
everything.
It's putting yourself in a situation where you're leveling up the people that you're around, the people that have bigger goals and beliefs and dreams, and and then but also being honest and vulnerable about, there have been days where I've had, a 20-mile training run on my calendar on a Saturday or something, and the alarm goes off and I lay in bed for 2 hours saying, well, when I get up, I have to go run. So I'm laying in bed until I just can't. I'm not going to get up and go do something else, but I'm not ready to go run yet. And so those internal struggles that people don't hear about, when you start connecting with other people who have that same passion, whether it's running, real estate investing, building a business, you start having those relationships where you are able to be open and honest and say, look, this is what I'm struggling with right now. And then you find out that they're struggling with it too, or had struggled with it, and you're able to see, well, how did they solve it? What did they do to overcome it? And so, I'm really excited to hear about your 100K. That's a nice big jump from the 26 miles. So tell me a little bit about that. Where's that race at?
It's local. It's actually, I think, well, it's supposed to be a relatively easy one. So I figured it'd be a good one to start with. Not a lot of elevation change. It is a trail run. It's like an 8.2-mile loop, I think.
Hmm.
And so there's some security in that. So I really think it's one of the easier ways to do it, but it is twice what I've ever ran. I've done a 50K, but it's twice the distance I've ever ran. But kind of just gotten bored with marathons. Not that they're boring, but I've, like you do one, it's really hard. You do another one, it's a little easier, and your body hurts less, and the mindset gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And
Mhm.
so I could continue to do marathons for physical, but as far as the mindset, the lessons I learned about myself, I really want to keep pushing. And I don't know where I'll stop, because maybe it'll be 100-miler next, but I figure this is a good jump. Maybe you'd have some advice for me on that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My wife asks me all the time. She says, when is enough enough? And I'm like, I don't know, but I won't know until I've crossed that line. So, um, one of the things that, there are people that are going to be listening to this or watching this that could care less about running, but I think it's the lessons that you learn, the marathon and the marathon and a 100K or a 100-miler, those are actually different sports. And it's the same
Mm,
thing with business. And this is going to sound bad, but just people go with it for me. Um, a marathon, when you start talking about 100 miles, is playing kind of small. And
mhm,
we can all get caught up on, this is as good as I am. This is, I'm only as good as a half marathon or
mhm.
that 5K or that marathon. But it's always stretching and trying to do something new and dreaming bigger and aligning yourself with newer people that are achieving at that higher level. So it's a different sport.
Mhm.
And when you try a new sport, it's just like if you were really good at basketball and then you decided to go play baseball. Like there are some things that carry over, but there's a lot of new skills, new mindset that you need to develop. And I think sometimes in business, we'll get to a certain plateau and we think, okay, well, I've sort of made it. I'm comfortable. If I do anything else, I have that chance of failure again because I'm stretching, I'm learning new things, and you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and
Mhm.
constantly stretching. But I think if you do, you find yourself playing in a whole different sport in a whole different level than what you were playing at before. And so I'm trying to justify the fact that we talked about running for so long. I'm trying to bring it back to business because I could have a running podcast where that's all we do is you and I talk about strategy on hydration and
Yeah.
electrolytes and stuff like that. But
I do think it applies to business. I mean, there's so many lessons I get out of it, not just the mindset, but for me, there's probably 8, 9 hours a week of running, and I get to learn. I put audible books in, and I learn about business. So there's so many podcasts I listen to or things I learn because I have that time set aside. Um, that otherwise I would have been sleeping, and I would have missed out on that opportunity to learn that little hack. So
mhm.
I do think it applies over to some extent if you allow yourself. The other thing that happens is you meet a lot of really cool people that you do business with. And um, like I have a running group we run with on Saturday, and there's all kinds of stuff we learn about. And they're businessmen and entrepreneurs. And um, I mean, let's face it, Tony, guys that run long distance like us are a little bit different. So um, we think differently and we act differently. And when you get a group of those guys together, then yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities with business that you expose yourself to that you otherwise wouldn't have.
All right, Shawn likes to ask a couple of questions that we try to ask a lot of our guests about. We've kind of talked about where you started, where you've grown to, and that journey. But we've got a few questions here that we want to ask. Shawn, you want to jump in, or you want me to take the first one?
I'll get it. Okay, what was your
Okay.
deepest, darkest moment as an entrepreneur?
I don't know if I could pick just one. Um, I will share this. This is relevant. This is last few months. We, as a real estate business, me and my partner, we decided last year there's a housing shortage. A lot of people are migrating to Oklahoma, and we'd built a business around buy and hold. But we said, hey, let's start flipping a bunch of houses, and we'll build that model, and we'll sell houses. And we failed. Um, not like bad, but the market did not do what we expected. A lot of national builders came to town, and we're competing with them. Interest rates didn't drop like we expected, and so it has been a painful. I mean, I'm about a month out of it at this point, but May and June were pretty painful for us as we analyzed and realized people weren't coming to the market. And this business that we built for flips, we've got to let these people go, and we've got to really get lean with the business and go back to what we know and cut prices and get rid of this inventory or turn it into buy and hold. So there's probably been a lot of bad ones, but that's the most recent, probably most relevant to the market and the times. And it was just a matter of we missed it, and we're gonna heal up where we can and pivot.
So just to be clear, you basically have some inventory that wouldn't sell, and can you speak to how many properties that kind of ended up being?
We had 12 houses on the market at one time, and it's just the problem is we would price cut, and if you price cut $3, $4, $5,000 and you do that times 12,
Yep.
well, that's a lot of money, and you do that every couple of weeks, and that's all profit you're cutting.
Yeah.
And then that starts eating into operation costs. And so, yeah, we had to pivot, and some of these houses we're just gonna rent them out because they'll fit that model. But you go from an active business model to a passive business model, and you can't combine them. They don't marry up. They're two very different things. And so that's what we're doing. We've, there was, we just had to slow down, quit buying, get healed up, and get ourselves back cash flowing.
Yep. What's the biggest myth about entrepreneurship that you wish you would have known before you got started?
It takes a lot of time. It may be more time than a W-2.
We trade in our 40-hour jobs to have an 80-hour work week.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I might answer that different if I had more time, but I would say right off, yeah, it just, as an entrepreneur, and I wouldn't trade it because I love to work and I love to think and grow. But as an entrepreneur, I don't think I realized that was going to be my whole life. It's just opportunities everywhere. And so your mind never shuts off, and you're always thinking and whatnot. And there's ways to buy back your time, but yeah, it is way more time consuming than you would know when you first start off.
So I want to touch on that a little bit. You talked about there being opportunities everywhere, and unfortunately, that is something that has bit both Shawn and I. And we learned some great lessons about staying in your lane and doing what you're good at. And we also got good at some things that we tried that were new. But it's kind of that shiny object syndrome. You find something and catches your attention, but you had a really good model of that buy and hold, and you decided, I've got this thing that's running really good, but I'm also going to throw my hat in this, and I'm going to try this other new sport, right? This new thing that I've never done before because I saw somebody else do it, or I talked to somebody and I heard somebody say that there was some good cash flow in there or good return on it. And so I'm just curious, now that you have gone through that experience, learning what you've learned and spending what you've spent on that lesson, is it a lesson that you would go through again, or would you try to be more disciplined and stay focused on the thing that was working and not change that or chase that new opportunity?
I think I would go through it again. I would definitely do some things different if I could. But there was lots of lessons learned. And so I don't think that I wouldn't want to undo what I've learned necessarily and take the easy road. But I agree. Like, I can get shiny, like my poor wife, like I've got a new idea every week. And and she, she's been married to me 20 some years, so she gets it and she rolls with it. But yeah, many of the ideas don't stick. And there's been, sometimes they fail, but we learn and we pivot, and we sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, and that's just kind of what we do here, is we learn lessons and move on, and we don't let ourselves get too beat up by it, but we do learn from them.
Yeah, Shawn and I had a business venture that we worked on together, and I think I won't speak for him. I think we share the same feelings or thoughts about it, but the outcome that we thought we were going to experience didn't fully manifest itself. However, going through those experiences and learning what we learned, I same as you, I wouldn't go back and undo it. It's just certainly took me on a different path and led to a different place than where I thought we were going to wind up, which is fantastic if you have that thick enough skin to be able to go back through that beginning cycle where you're just getting punched over and over, and then you eventually develop that tough skin and you start punching back a little bit. And so,
but even Tony, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say there's no gain from not giving any risk, right? You got to give risks, and that's how you get the gain. I didn't mean to cut you off, Marty.
No, you're good. I was going to do a running analogy. Like, Tony, you've done a lot of races, everything's lined up, your training's perfect, and then something happens the day of or day before, and it suddenly, what you perceived as the race going a certain way, it doesn't. And I think that happens. I think that maybe that would be the lesson learned about entrepreneurs. We think we have it all figured out and it's going to go this way, this way, this way, and rarely does it. Like, I don't know, have you had a perfect race yet, Tony?
I've had one race that I think is like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to beat it. It's the one that stands out, but every other race, it's, I always say, long distance running is more about problem solving than it is about running. It's just who can stay on the trail on their feet, pointed in the right direction with the right head space, who can do that the longest, and they're the ones that are going to win,
And I
or at
think
least have a good race.
I think you could say the same about entrepreneurship and starting a business. Like, we think we have it figured out, and really do we do? And then it's the problem solving, and it's who can solve the problems the fastest, and who can pivot and make the changes and stay on their feet.
Yeah, I heard one of the greats in the ultra running, trail running sport say something one time. I was out listening. I was trying to get into a race, and they had a lottery, and so they had some people come and speak at the race. And but she said, the race doesn't start until the wheels fall off, and the wheels fall off for everybody. And so it's not how you do when things are going great that determines your success. It's how you do when things fall apart, how quickly you can put things back together, how together you can stay with your thoughts and, keep those moving in the right direction and being positive and really trying to find solutions as opposed to being a victim. And it just really has stuck with me. It's one of the things I say all the time when things start falling apart. I'm like, okay, this is where I start to excel, is figuring out how to make it through when the wheels are falling off. So
that's good.
Marty, what is your contribution to the world?
I really want to educate, get more people being more intentional with their lives, and help inspire people to do anything they want. Like, I got into running. I wasn't a runner. I bought in a lot of real estate. It wasn't the way I was raised at all or trained at all, but I think we have so much potential, and I would love to get the world living out their full potential and doing more with their lives than scrolling on a phone or whatever.
I love the name of your podcast, Kill Complacency. If you flip the words around, complacency kills, means a lot to me because it has killed a lot of pilots that, that's when complacency really gets down and dirty, right? And I've lost friends in the aviation world because of complacency. And we wake up in the morning thinking we're not going to die, right? But we miss a point on the checklist, or we feel like everything's going to work out well, and all they call it the holes in the Swiss cheese lineup, and that's how people die. So kudos to the podcast. Where else can people find out more about you?
I'm on most social platforms. The Intentional Investor, #1. You have to have that number in there, But Intentional Investor, you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, Marty, thank you so much for your time. This has been really fun. I love the correlations between running and business, and just finding out people's struggles. Like, you're not alone, right? We're all going through similar struggles in life, and lean on others to get through them.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate you guys, and I'm excited for where this leads for you guys with this podcast and contributing to the world in this way. So kudos to you guys.
Thanks, Marty. Appreciate it.
Yep. And I'm going to be following up with you on your 100K, and then seeing what you dip your toes into next. So let's stay connected.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time to cut through the noise of what it really takes to be a successful entrepreneur.
If today's episode hit home, share it with a friend, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.